There is another head of objections against the soul's receiving consolation from an interest in forgiveness, arising from the consideration of its present state and condition as to actual holiness, duties, and sins. Souls complain when in darkness and under temptations that they cannot find that holiness nor those fruits of it in themselves which they suppose an interest in pardoning mercy will produce. Their hearts they find are weak, and all their duties worthless. If they were weighed in the balance, they would be all found too light. In the best of them there is such a mixture of self, hypocrisy, unbelief, vainglory, that they are even ashamed and confounded with the remembrance of them. These things fill them with discouragement, so that they refuse to be comforted, or to entertain any refreshing persuasion from the truth insisted on. But rather they conclude that they are utter strangers from that forgiveness that is with God, and so continue helpless in their depths. According to the method proposed and hitherto pursued, I shall only lay down some such general rules as may support a soul under the despondencies that are apt in such a condition to befall it, that none of these things may weaken it in its endeavor to lay hold of forgiveness. 1. Add one grace to another. And this is a proper place to put in execution our 8th rule, to take heed of heartless complaints when vigorous actings of grace are expected at our hands. If it be thus indeed, why lie you on your faces? Why do you not rise and put out yourselves to the utmost, giving all diligence to add one grace to another until you find yourselves in a better frame? Supposing then the putting of that rule into practice, I add, no holiness tends to self-righteousness. That known holiness is apt to degenerate into self-righteousness. What God gives us on account of sanctification, we are ready enough to reckon on the score of justification. It is a hard thing to feel grace and to believe as if there were none. We have so much of the Pharisee in us by nature that it is sometimes well that our good is hid from us. We are ready to take our corn and wine and bestow them on other lovers. Were there not in our hearts a spiritually sensible principle of corruption, and in our duties a discernible mixture of self, it would be impossible we should walk so humbly as is required of them who hold communion with God, in a covenant of grace and pardoning mercy. It is a good life which is attended with a faith of righteousness and a sense of corruption. While I know Christ's righteousness, I shall the less care to know my own holiness. To be holy is necessary, to know it sometimes a temptation. God abhors duties turned into self-righteousness. Even duties of God's appointment, when turned into self-righteousness, are God's great abhorrency, Isaiah 66, verses 2 and 3. What has a good original may be vitiated by a bad end. Holiness is actually known by the opposition to it. Oftentimes holiness in the heart is more known by the opposition that is made thereto it than by its own prevailing work. The Spirit's operation is known by the flesh's opposition. We find a man's strength by the burdens he carries, and not the pace that he goes. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? Is a better evidence of grace and holiness than God, I thank you, I am not as other men. A heart pressed, grieved, burdened, not by the guilt of sin only, which reflects with trouble on an awakened conscience, but by the close adhering power of indwelling sin, tempting, seducing, soliciting, hindering, captivating, conceiving, restlessly disquieting, may from thence have as clear an evidence of holiness as from a delightful fruit-bearing. What is it that is troubled and grieved in you? What is it that seems to be almost killed and destroyed, that cries out, complains, and longs for deliverance? Is it not the new creature? Is it not the principle of spiritual life whereof you are a partaker? I don't speak of troubles and disquietments for sin committed, nor of fears and perturbations of mind lest sin should break forth to loss, shame, ruin, dishonor, nor of the continuing of a convinced conscience lest damnation should ensue, but of the striving of the Spirit against sin, out of a hatred and a loathing of it, upon all the mixed considerations of love, grace, mercy, fear, the beauty of holiness, excellency of communion with God, that are proposed in the gospel. If you seem to yourself to be only passive in these things, to do nothing but to endure the assaults of sin, yet if you are sensible and stand under the stroke of it as under the stroke of an enemy, there is a root of the matter. And as it is thus as to the substance and being of holiness, so it is also as to the degrees of it. Degrees of holiness are to be measured more by opposition than self-operation. He may have more grace than another who brings not forth so much fruit as the other, because he has more opposition, more temptation, Isaiah 41:17. And sense of the lack of all is a great sign of somewhat in the soul.